Well, first of all, I appreciate you having me. I appreciate an engineer reaching out to somebody that doesn't have the title engineer and looking for perspective. My name's Jordan Cundiff. I've been in this field about 8 years. I've worked various states, various settings, anywhere from power plants. I've worked refineries. Right now I'm working with you shop work. And that's a lot of what you'll face as a contractor in general, or even as if you're an engineer in general. But going back to just kind of a little bit about me, a lot of traveling, worked. I live in Kentucky. I worked some in Kentucky, but worked in a lot of different states,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of different settings, inside, outside, hot, cold.
Yeah. You said you had been to 30 states?
As far as just traveling through layovers and working in, yeah, I would say close to 30. I mean, I've not physically worked in 30 states, but, just the traveling to and from the job, and, you travel from this job to that job before you go home.
Yeah, I think this is a very different can of worms. This is something that I had never been exposed to, field work in general, whether it's field engineering or field service. You mentioned it a little bit. It seems as though you travel from job to job, and then after completing a job, you go to another job, and it's just, I guess, a cycle.
Yeah.
About that.
And a lot of people in this industry wouldn't understand what is field work. That's a very, very specific to this type of work term. But field work is you are out in the elements, like where the machines are running, the machines are in place, whether it's something as simple as a bearing swap, a seal swap. Again, I deal with talk about dealing with the elements of hot, cold, and this, rain and such, protect the machinery. There's
Right.
nights where if you work outside, you're going to have, lightning alert. There's lightning within some places 10 miles, 15 miles. All right, we can't be out here for 30 minutes. Well, you better be sure and cover that machine up with plastic, because if it turns into an all-night event, last thing you want to come back to is, a journal full of surface rust.
Now, another question that I had pertaining to this, I guess, scenario, is there a lot of overtime? Because I hear there's a lot of overtime.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Yes, in most scenarios out in the field, there is a lot of overtime. You've got, I've worked at a shell refinery out in Deer Park, where you're like, all right, in this one unit, we've got 14 machines we're sending out, just for argument's sake.
Sure.
We're sending out these 14 machines, and while they're gone, we're going to be servicing these machines that aren't leaving. And by the time those get back, we better be ready to reinstall them. You're talking turnarounds. You're talking huge, huge amounts of money, huge amounts of, okay, we're waiting on this. We're waiting to push the button on this to get it up and running. I remember specifically working on a blower for a unit at Shell, and it had some unforeseen issues out of the maintenance spec. Shut down, supposed to have nothing to do with the shutdown. We go over to work on it, and they're like, all right, we're losing. It was almost $1 million a day.
Right.
And so that goes back to, yes, there's a lot of overtime. There have been many jobs I've been on for 2-3 months where it's 7/12s.
I guess sometimes there will be cases where you're working straight, like you said, 7/12s for X amount of months, but then you're not working for a couple months after that, right? That also happens.
Yeah, I've noticed in this line of work, but pre-COVID, you could really account for right around the holidays, right around Christmas to the New Year, you could kind of count on having off 1st of January. And then my personal thing was, as being an independent contractor, I was like, I want the summer months off, which is not hard to do in this line of work, because summer months, that's when they're getting the most money for power. That's when they're getting the most money for, gasoline. They want those machines running. Most places, I'm not going to speak for all places, but most
Sure.
places say planned maintenance does not happen in June, July, August, or July, August, in a certain time frame.
Yeah.
And it may be, well, this plant has 10 weeks where they want peak production, and it's not shut down unless it's forced.
Yeah.
And then this plant may have 10 weeks, or 8 weeks, whatever. But, me personally, I don't want to work that lifestyle 12 months out of the year.
Yeah.
Now, sure, post-COVID, stuff got pushed back. Things got changed. If you wanted to work that, I'm sure that could be possible, but I don't encourage anybody for that because eventually you get burnt out. I would rather do this for longevity, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, and be able to sustain it than do it for a year and a half, just year and a half gone and like I'm done with this.
Yeah.
Go back to what you're saying. It can be very, very labor intensive.
Oh yeah.
I've spent many days swinging a 20-pound sledgehammer at a knocker wrench. And as far as the engineers go, they may not be out there the 12 hours a day doing the physical work, but I've known many engineers that are like, all right, my crew works 7 to 7, but you get there at 6. If you were there at 6 o'clock in the morning, that engineer's already there. And when I scan my badge out at 7 o'clock at night, that engineer's still there. So,
Right.
I mean, there are engineers that'll put in 14, 15, 16 hours a day just because they have that much passion for the job or they have that much pressure on them. I've not been in their shoes, but I've seen enough of them do that to know that, that's very possible.
And then I guess I wanted to touch a little bit on like the difference between, I guess, contracting and because I hear contractor versus hired by the company. Do you know the differences between the two, or you don't have to know all of them, but
Yeah.
a couple of them maybe?
And, in most lines of work, when you hear the term full-time, that implies full-time hours. Well, out here, you're putting in, a lot of times, 2 weeks worth of full-time hours a week.
Yeah.
My understanding, kind of the way I look at full-time is, okay, you're getting benefits. You're getting, 401k contributions, health insurance. Some companies even do like a salary where you get paid your hourly rate 40 hours a week to be at home. You get benefits, but in most cases, you're only tied down to that company.
Yeah.
Whereas contracting, you've got a little more leeway as far as you pick and choose your jobs. Another thing I like about contracting, you can almost, in some scenarios, if you're lucky enough, like I was, to run into kind of a crew, you can kind of travel together. Yeah, just to make a long story short, my definition of full-time versus contractor would be company benefits, company, in certain scenarios, company vehicle, company uniforms, versus more pick and choose.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess that leads into we've touched up on it a little bit, but I guess that leads into like pros and cons of the job itself. If you can go into a little bit of depth with that, I guess what you found beneficial, what you think is a little setback or anything like that.
The pros to the job would be, with the amount of hours comes really good money. If you come into it with the right mindset, you can either A, dig yourself out of the big hole, or B, set yourself up for the future. Or if you do long enough, you can do both. The pros would be, like I alluded to earlier, getting paid to see places you would never see otherwise.
Yeah.
There would be no other time in my life I would find myself being in Healy, Alaska, which is right next to Denali Park.
That's amazing.
The cons would be, if you don't watch yourself, you can be in a scenario where you're stuck out here. As far as, I'm used to making big money, but if you set yourself up on, okay, I just came off an outage where I was making $12,000 a month. Well, if you set yourself up, I have $12,000 a month to spend. Before you know it, you will be out here continuously. Car payments, house payment, boat payment, toy payment, this payment, that payment.
Yeah.
The cons are, the money can be used negatively just as easily. Actually, matter of fact, easier than it can be used positively.
Yeah.
And earlier, going back to being on the road, missing holidays.
That's got to be the hardest. Yeah.
It does. And what even harder than that would be like funerals. Because it's either A, you leave the job and go home to the funeral, or B, you make the decision not to come home. And then there's some hurt feelings of, well, this person's passing was not significant enough for you to come home.
Yeah.
And another con could be, it's a pro or con. The pro in the long run is it gets you out of your comfort zone. You see different cultures, you eat different foods, you meet different people, you see different setups. Like before this, I I traveled on vacation a few times, but I didn't know much outside of, Kentucky. But once you get out, you see just different, scenarios. But at first, it kind of is a con. I was lucky enough to start traveling with my dad, so I didn't mind that.
Right.
But had I not had him, I could see how it'd be very intimidating.
I think meeting people is always tough. Like figuring out
Oh,
people,
yes.
figuring out their personality, understanding how you're supposed to communicate with them. That took me a while. That could
Oh,
take
yeah.
months and months.
Kind of the rule of thumb I go by is I'll let the other person do most of the talking and I kind of feel them out.
Yeah.
How are they going to react? Are they going to react well? Because and this is the biggest piece of advice I give to somebody, especially new, ask questions. Do it in a respectful way. Don't be afraid to ask, why are we doing this? As long as you present it the right way. Don't be afraid to ask, how did you get that number? Or how did you know this was the next step? And part of that is personal responsibility of, okay, ask it in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
But secondly, you've got to figure out somebody, how are they going to take it? Like if I've walked up to people before and been like, now why is it that way? And I've had people, well, that's because that's what the book says. I've had people say, well, okay, if you look at this drawing and you look at these figures, that's why the thrust is what it should be, or whatever. So, yeah, that would be my biggest piece of advice. And even now doing it, 8 years, I still have a lot of questions, a lot of things I don't understand. I'm not afraid to ask a question, and never will be. I don't care if I've done this 40 years.
Yeah.
Nobody knows it all. The last thing on my part would be to be humble in your craft, be humble in your understanding. Use an engineer. There's stuff that I have firsthand experience of that you don't, vice versa, and be willing to work together. There's not, and I've seen it on so many jobs, the power dynamic of the engineers or the management versus the workers. And in most scenarios, there's no need for that.
It's better to be humble
Yep.
and make it a learning, outcome, as opposed to be arrogant and then have nobody help you, nobody call out your mistake,
Yep.
or we just wait for you to make the mistake and then blame you for it. So,
Yep.
Being humble goes a long way, and I appreciate you coming on.
Oh yeah. Anytime.
And I hope that people can take something beneficial out of this conversation, and hopefully, somebody that wants to wants to be a contractor, wants to be an engineer, can take a look at this video and have some insight.
If mechanicking is your calling and it's something you really enjoy doing, then yes, this can be a very, very beneficial field.
And that's also
especially you live in a town like me, a small town, kind of secluded. You don't get Saturday Night Live till Wednesday. We're in the middle of nowhere. It can provide you with a very good lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's just, are you willing to sacrifice being gone from that lifestyle?
Right.
2/3, 3/4 of the year.
Right.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on.
Oh yeah.
And I hope that this can help somebody out there that's on the fence or thinking about doing either of these fields, and especially how to. I guess the most important thing is how to interact with people, because you're going to be interacting with a lot of people.
Even though you're not working with the public,
Sure.
which again, that is a big positive of this job overlooked. But even though you're not working with the general public, you're working with people. As an engineer, you're not going to be stuck in a lab all day.
Yeah.
You're not going to be stuck in an office all day. Just, okay, here's the numbers, y'all go get them.
Right.
But yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and hopefully this won't be the last time.
Yeah, absolutely not. Because we're always learning, we're always growing, and maybe in 6 months to a year, I'll have you back on.
Sounds good. I'll be ready.
Alrighty. Well, appreciate your time, and have a good rest of your night.
Yep. I guess I'll see you tomorrow at work.
Alrighty. Catch you later, man.